Greg has his style and Lila has hers and Shira is learning a style.
How long is she out of the rabbi?
He was ordained last May.
She's getting there. Very talented for a young rabbi.
She does a great job.
I tell you, it's like,
I remember the olden days in the old, I don't know, small chapel. I used to go to that, you were there every week now.
good.
I'm so great.
There was something nice about that chapel. I'm just trying to remember what it was.
It was small, it was cozy.
It was small, cozy, the acoustics were miserable. You have to think about, what does it say about a room where you have to carpet the walls, right? To muffle the sound, but it was good in that place. A lot of years in that space.
Tradition, that's all you left with.
All right, so hello, everybody. I am not Rabbi Laila Haas. And I did not stay in a Holiday Inn Express last night, thank goodness. Lila is on a little bit of vacation. And so she was actually supposed to be in Israel this week as part of the Federation's community mission. But unfortunately, that mission was canceled because you can't get there. And so I said, you blocked the time off anyway, you need a little time off, and reluctantly she agreed. So I'm very blessed to be in my first Parsha perspectives class.
This your first?
This is my first, hopefully not my last. And the other first today is that I believe this is the first time I've ever taught Torah with Amy in the room. So it's a Shehachiyanu moment after 30 years in the rabbinate. She just doesn't want to come on Saturday.
She'll get it later.
She's a diligent student of Torah on Fridays. And she takes her Shabbat rest, which we'll talk about today, on Saturdays. Before we begin, does anyone have any good and welfare? I got an email this morning from Rabbi Paul Yedwab, who's my friend at Temple Israel, who wrote, I sent him a note yesterday just saying, on behalf of our congregation and community, we wanted to send you our love and concern and sadness over the attack on your congregation today. I'm sure it's an excruciating moment and the most challenging leadership challenge that any rabbi can face. Temple Israel and your community is blessed to have you and your wisdom in this awful time. He's been at that synagogue for over 30 years. And he wrote back and he said, we came through hell remarkably whole, but there is much healing to do, as you might imagine. Our teachers, staff, and security team have been magnificent, and I am so grateful for all of them. I'm hoping to see you soon. I want to just share one other piece of good and welfare, which was incredibly moving. We have a number of security personnel, both here at the Schaefer campus and also at the Beck campus, where our preschool has 317 children. And Rabbi Haas was walking out of the campus yesterday. She overheard one of the security officers talking to his supervisor and saying, yes, I know I'm supposed to take time off, but I can't not be at the temple tomorrow. We are very, very blessed to have extraordinary partners with Sun States who keep our campuses and our, not only the campuses, but the people who venture into them safe. So if you see one of our security team, just give them a special thanks. If I were them, I'd be nervous coming to work today. And we're grateful that they often will say nothing will happen to you so long as I'm here.
Wow.
Today in Parshat Vayakhel, yes, ma'am.
But we had planned before a special security training for congregants, and so what, it was canceled, but was still postponed. Maybe we should reschedule that.
We can certainly address that. Yes, I don't know the reason why it was canceled. I suspect it was lower registration, but we can certainly talk to our team and see if we can schedule another training.
Thank you. We're sure Boxley's sister is the rabbi. They have laminated cards in the front, that's in front of you to tell you to stay close.
And Naples tells you where to go.
I don't know how I felt about it, but I don't know what I'm not feeling.
Yeah, there's always a balance of trying to make a sanctuary a safe space so that you don't let the threats from the outside world permeate your experience there, and diligence and responsibility, and we try to manage that all the time. So I appreciate the thought.
So the talk we had, I think it was yesterday, the speaker,
On Wednesday,
yeah. Have you had any feedback from people of what the consensus was of what?
I have not had feedback other than the people I spoke with that evening. I think, people have strong thoughts and opinions about sort of what's the right way to respond in the sort of fraught nature of this moment. And if you are responsible for the security of the Jewish people in America, or the Jewish people in the state of Israel, or the complexity of what is the state of Israel and how do you keep that country safe or our people safe here, those are not obvious answers. And so I think it's important for us as a community to try to get a lot of answers and try to use that to formulate our own sense of how we're supposed to meet the moment. David's been working to promote the strength of the Jewish people for upwards of 40 years in his career, and has an enormous amount of wisdom, having met with, I think, more heads of state than any Jew on the planet, including the Prime Minister of Israel. And I was appreciative of the wisdom that he shared. I didn't have to necessarily agree with everything that he said, but I was appreciative of what he shared. I don't know if we want to take time to delve into that, since not everybody who was here was at that talk, but we can certainly talk after our class today. People have thoughts and feelings they want to share. Okay, so Parshat Vayakhel is an interesting Torah portion because the book of Exodus describes the construction of what's called the Mishkan. Sometimes in English we call that the tabernacle, right? A tabernacle is a what?
Temporary structure.
It's a temporary structure. It's a big tent, right? A tabernacle is a fancy word for a tent, right? And so if you have a temple that you need to schlep around with you as you wander in the wilderness, a tent's a good idea, right? Because you can carry it with you, right? And you can take it down and you can erect it in a new place, right? Again and again and again. Yeah.
And how often did they move? Because the distance is not that great, so they couldn't have walked straight, because they would have gotten there in a.
Well, over 40 years, they wandered quite a bit. And if you look in the book of Numbers, it will tell you all of the way stations that the Israelites stopped at along the way. And they camped here, and then they journeyed to there, and then they camped there, and they journeyed to there. So there was repeated construction and deconstruction of that edifice over not just the years of their wander. Got to remember that, the Israelites probably arrived in the land of Israel somewhere around, if you had to date it, right, the end of the 13th century BCE, right? Probably the end of the 1200s, early 1100s BCE. King Solomon doesn't build the temple in Jerusalem until 900 BCE, maybe 850, right? So you've got hundreds of years where the tabernacle was all there was. And it was rooted in a few different places, most famously in Shiloh, right? Which is where King Saul had the tabernacle, but there were other places. And, you can read in the stories of David and how the Ark of the Covenant was sort of schlepped around. And there's a lot more there, right? So the tabernacle or the Mishkan, the word Mishkan doesn't mean tent. right? The word Mishkan, Shechunah is a neighborhood, right? L'shaken means to dwell somewhere. Okay, so the Mishkan is where God's presence was seen to dwell in the community. And so there are two parshiot that describe the construction of the tabernacle. One is Parshat Truma, right, which we did a few weeks ago, and the other is Parshat Tetzaveh, which follows it. Parshat Truma talks a little bit more about the structure itself. Parshat Tetzaveh talks a lot about the implements and specifically the garments that the priests were asked to wear when they would conduct their service. At the very end of, it's almost an afterthought in Exodus 31, we'll get to, it says, oh, by the way, keep Shabbat. Then you have this thing we studied last week, which was what? Yeah, this cold golden calf episode, right? Which we'll talk about. And then at the end of Parshat Ki Tisa, Moses restores order to the camp and helps the people to get back in order, and then returns to Mount Sinai to get the rest of the rules, right? And to get his second set of tablets. And there's this very powerful moment where Moses says, oh God, let me behold your presence. And God allows all of God's goodness to pass before Moses. And then you get to Parshat Vayakhel, which is generally paired with Parshat Pekudei, the last two parshiot of the book of Exodus, which we read this week. In leap years, these portions are split, and you read Vayakhel one week and Pekudei the next week. There are certain portions that are traditionally tied together. Anybody know another one? Tazria and Metzora, right? Because no one should have to talk about leprosy for more than 1 week at a time, right? So Tazria talks about what happens if you get leprosy, and Metzora tells you what you do to get out of it. But normally those are paired together. But Vayakhel and Pekudei are generally paired together as well, which is this week. And what happens this week is you have a complete reiteration of the construction itself of the tabernacle. It's as if the first iteration of the construction of the tabernacle was, all right, here's what you're gonna do. And then you get to this week's Parsha, and here's what we're doing. Okay? But it's interesting that the book of Exodus is consumed with construction of this, right? Even more, ink is in parchment over the construction of the tabernacle and its implements than the parting of the Red Sea and our slavery and the plagues, right? So we're going to take a look at the beginning of this week's Parsha, because there's way too much to actually focus on, but we're going to look at one particular element, which I found to be particularly fascinating, and hopefully you will too. And so we'll say together, Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu l'akshot b'divrei Torah. Blessed be you, Adonai, our God, ruling spirit of the universe, who makes us holy by giving us mitzvahs to do and commands us to get busy with the study of Torah. All right. Let me move these people over. Okay, is there someone who would like to read for us? Tara, go ahead.
Moses then convoked the whole Israelite community and said to them, these are the things that Adonai has commanded you to do.
All right, stop there. Okay, so the Hebrew word vayakhel, can you see my little arrow here? Okay. You see kuf he lamed, kahal. Okay, a kahal is a congregation. Okay, synagogues are often referred to as a kahal kadosh, a holy congregation. Sometimes you'll see actually that abbreviation next to the name of a synagogue. It'll say kuf chuk chuk kuf, which means kahila kadosha, a holy congregation. And so Moses literally congregated. That's kind of what it seems to mean. That Moses it's turning the congregation into a verb. Moses congregated, and in English, the best way is to say convoked, right? But it's a very fascinating thing, because how do you make a congregation a congregation? Is a congregation simply a group of people that gather together on a regular basis? Or is there something more to being a congregation? Connection,
Relationships.
relationships, community, what's that mean?
It's not like people just come together, it's like they're part of something more. It's not like being part of a town where you live in the same borders. It's more like being part of a group of people that's bonded together.
Okay, so thank you for Spencer, right? And all this is of course true, but what makes a community be a community is when there is a sense of bonded commitment and connection between the people who call themselves members of that community.
Yeah, there's a commonality, right?
Not always, right? You can have people in your
Right.
community who are not common with you, who are different, right? Yeah.
How is it different from a tribe?
A tribe is generally composed of people who share familial bonds. Though that can be loosely constructed, right? But they share almost like a familial identity, right? Which is why Jews often say, oh, he's an MOT, right? He's a member of the tribe, even though Israel had 12 tribes, right? And there are a whole multiplicity of ways in which one can manifest one's Jewish identity. But there is a sense, right, that when people come together, how many of you like really know your neighbors?
I don't know any of my neighbors.
Right? Even though you say, oh, I live in a community, you'll say we live in a gated community, or I live in a country club community, or I live in a condominium community. And we call them communities because we want them to be. I was it was impressed. On Tuesday night, we had this wonderful woman, Rosette Goldstein, who is a survivor of the Holocaust. She was a hidden child in France. And as she was telling her amazing story, which moves me every time she tells it, her mother and father had an apartment in France, in Paris. They were the only Jews in this apartment building. And her father ended up having to go to a work camp and then was in a concentration camp and never returned. Her mother ended up living alone in this apartment because they arranged for their 4-year-old daughter to be given to a farm family that was in a rural part of France, several hours away from Paris. And so here's this Jewish woman who has to walk around with a Jewish star, but how do you make a living in Paris during the Nazi era? And they talked about how, or she talked about how all of the non-Jewish neighbors in that apartment took care of the Jewish woman in the building, whom the Nazis had apparently forgotten about and didn't deport. So, and they gave her work so she could do some seamstress work and try to put a few francs in her pocket so that she could live, right? So a community is a group of people that are bound together with a sense of mutual responsibility one for the other. Do the Israelites generally, when you think of what you've learned about Israelites in the book of Exodus, do they sound much like a community?
Not yet.
Yeah.
Not yet, right? But the interesting thing is what happened when the Israelites came together as a community in last week's portion?
They built a golden calf.
It was an utter disaster.
And then
Right?
they killed a bunch of themselves.
And yeah, and there was death and destruction, and the whole project of what God had created had almost come to its demise. Here, Moses brings them back. Think how dangerous it was for Moses to do this. Right? The last time the Israelites came together, they built a golden calf. And now Moses says, no, we're going to come together, but this time we're not coming together to do something wrong. We're going to come together to do something right. Okay? And before they even get to a discussion of this Mishkan tabernacle business, they say something else. Go ahead, Tara.
On 6 days work, on 6 days work may be done, but on the seventh day you shall have a Sabbath of complete rest, holy to Adonai. Whoever does any work on it shall be put to death. You shall kindle no fire throughout your settlements on the seventh day.
All right, so interestingly, before they even talk about the tabernacle, the first thing Moses says is keep Shabbat. Interestingly, right, there's what the scholars call a chiastic structure, right, where you kind of have a mirror reflection. So in Truma and Tetzaveh, you have the discussion of the construction of the tabernacle and its implements. Then you have the golden calf mess, and then it goes back in reverse. The first thing you talk about here is the last thing you talked about there, right? Where the Sabbath is almost, oh, by the way, right? And as we'll see as we get into it, it says, like, oh, by the way, don't forget that you have to keep the Sabbath. Here, the first thing that Moses says is keep the Sabbath. Now, there's lots of different places where the Torah talks about keeping the Sabbath and gives a justification, right? What's the one thing that Moses says don't do on Shabbat?
Light a fire.
Okay, now, we're going to read through the rest of the beginning of the Parsha, but we're going to come back. I want you to keep this whole thought of all the things we're going to mention, don't light a fire. Okay, and we're going to talk about why lighting a fire was so present in Moses' mind and why that's sort of the crucial thing that's going on here. So Tara, I'm going to invite, whoops, sorry about that. Wrong button. Keep going.
Moses said further to the whole community of Israelites, this is what Adonai has commanded. Take from among you gifts to Adonai, everyone whose heart so moves them shall bring them. Gifts for gold, silver, copper, blue, purple, and crimson yarns, fine linen and goat's hair, tan ram skins, dolphin skins, and acacia wood, oil for lighting, spices for anointing, the anointing oil, and for the aromatic incense, lapis lazuli and other stones for setting for the ephod and the breastpiece.
Okay, so this mirrors what you see in Truma, right? Braden Coram, who was my 6'1" bar mitzvah boy last Shabbat,
Yes.
is a young man I can really look up to.
Yeah, that is all.
Been using that for a while. Sweetest kid, when we were studying this week's Parsha in preparation for his bar mitzvah, because on Saturday afternoon is when you read the next week's Parsha. So this was his portion for his bar mitzvah on last Shabbat. We talked about what it means to give from the heart. And I said, why do you think it was so important that the Israelites were asked to give from the heart? And he said something that I thought was, I'd never heard a bar mitzvah kid say it. He says, well, they used to be slaves. And everything they did was because they had to and they had no choice.
Yeah.
And so God wanted them to do this, because this is going to be a lot of work, the opposite of the way slaves work. So slaves do what they do, not because they want to, but because they have to. And God wanted them to build this not because they had to, but because they wanted to. I thought it was pretty brilliant for a 12-and-a-half-year-old boy to discover that, right? But of course, what's also the one thing a slave doesn't get? Shabbat, right? Now, a Jewish slave, if you go back earlier in the book of Exodus, Parsha Mishpatim, a Jewish slave does get Shabbat, right? A master of a Jewish slave is not allowed to compel his Jewish slave to work on Shabbat. He has to rest as the rest of the family does. But when you think of slavery, you don't say, oh, you get 30 days of PTO, right? There's no P and there's no TO, right? You have to work. And so interestingly, as they're getting ready to build the tabernacle, what's the two things that God says? Don't build it like a slave. This needs to be something that you do for the full holiness that a free person can endeavor, right? It needs to come from the heart. And then there's a whole bunch of stuff they have to collect, right? Gold, silver, copper, blue, purple, and crimson yarns, all this other stuff, okay? Keep going. And not only do they need stuff, what else do they need? Talent, right? Keep going, Sarah.
And let all among you be who are skilled come and make that Adonai has commanded. The tabernacle, its tent, its covering, its clasps and its planks, its bars, its posts, and its sockets. The ark and its poles, the cover, the curtain for the screen, the table and its poles, and all its utensils, and the bread of display.
Okay, so if you don't have material, you can give your talent. So anybody who's got artisan skill can come and help make all of this stuff, right? Because there's textiles that have to be woven, and there's metal that has to be smithed, and there's wood that has to be worked, and all the different things that are necessary in order to construct the tabernacle. There's bread to be baked, right? Keep going.
The lampstand for lighting and its furnishing and its lamps, and the oil for the lighting, the altar of incense and its poles, the anointing oil and the aromatic incense, the entrance screen for the entrance of the tabernacle, the altar of burnt offering, its covered grating, its poles, and all of its furnishings, the laver and its stand.
All right. It's just going to give you a good laundry list of all the different things that have to be constructed. Keep going.
The hangings for the enclosure, its posts and sockets, the screen for the gate of the court, pegs for the tabernacle, the pegs for the enclosure and their cords, the service vestments for officiating in the sanctuary, the sacral vestments of Aaron the priest, and the vestments of his sons for priestly service.
Okay, just one more little couple of snippets. I just want to give you the whole context of the beginning of the Parsha. So we're not going to get into all of these different implements and what they were and what they were for. We're going to focus on something else today.
So the whole community of the Israelites left Moses' presence, and everyone who excelled in ability and everyone whose spirit moved him came, bringing to Adonai his offering for the work of the tent of meeting and all of its service for his sacred vestments. Men and women, all whose hearts moved them, all who could make an elevation and offering of gold to Adonai, came to bring brooches, earrings, rings, and pendants, gold objects of all kinds.
All right, why is it so important that they were bringing all of these different pieces of jewelry?
I thought they used them all up on the golden calf.
Right? Apparently not everybody, right? And apparently there was still some left. And when they talk about an elevation offering, they mean, so this is how you would present it. You'd say, I give this to, and you would take the thing you were giving and you'd lift it up. I give this for the service of God, and you'd hand it over, right? So they said, please go and do all this, right? And they left. And everyone who excelled in the building, everyone whose spirit was moved, came and they either brought their stuff, right? Or, keep going.
And everyone who had in his possession blue, purple, and crimson yarns, fine linen, goat's hair, tan ram skin, dolphin skins brought them. Everyone who would make gifts of silver, copper, and brought them as gifts for Adonai. And everyone who had in his possession acacia wood for any work of service brought that.
Okay, so they all brought the materials. Okay. But the important thing that they said you got to do is you have to make sure that you observe Shabbat. So they brought all this, right? A little bit later, we're going to see that they actually brought more than was even necessary. There were more volunteers than work to be done and more materials than was necessary to construct even this very large communal thing, so that Moses had to say to everybody, stop. So when we look at how we know if we're working, because what did the beginning of the Parsha say? If you work on the Sabbath, right? That's a capital offense. So you better know what you're doing, right? So how do you know if you're working? Well, the Mishnah tells you, okay? The categories of work are 40 minus 1. Is there somebody else that would like to go through these 40 different kinds of work? Spencer, go ahead.
Sowing, plowing, reaping, binding sheaves, threshing, winnowing, cleansing crops, grinding, sifting, kneading, baking, shearing, wool, washing, or beating or dyeing it, spinning, weaving, making 2 loops, weaving 2 threads, separating 2 threads, tying a knot, loosening a knot, sewing 2 stitches, tearing in order to sew 2 stitches, hunting a gazelle, slaughtering or flaying it or salting it, or curing its skin, scraping it or cutting it up, writing 2 letters, erasing in order to write 2 letters, building, pulling down, putting out a fire, lighting a fire, striking with a hammer, and taking things from one domain to another.
All right, so these are all different kinds of work. Yes.
At the beginning, why is it important 40 minus 1? Why not just say 39? Is that just the way they spoke, or is that significant somehow?
To the rabbis, it was significant because forties and collections of forties were complete sets. So the fact that there were 39 had some significance, that it was missing one as a complete set, right? What's the one thing that's missing of a complete set? Rest, right? A complete week would include rest. So 6 days a week, you do almost a complete set. Shabbat is the time you add that 40th component, right? That allows you to feel like you have a complete set. So sowing, planting seeds, plowing, reaping, binding sheaves. Everyone know what binding sheaves is? Right? Ask Joseph, he'll tell you about binding sheaves, right? Threshing, when you take the wheat in, you whack it on the floor so that the top flour part comes off. Winnowing, getting the seeds out from the chaff, washing it, grinding it so that it turns into flour, sifting, kneading, baking. Then you move on to the next, shearing the wool, and then washing or beating or dyeing it, and then spinning it into yarn or thread, weaving. Anybody know what the loops are for? The loom. Making a loom, okay? Weaving two threads, separating two threads, tying a knot, loosening a knot. These are all about textiles, right? Sewing two stitches, tearing in order to sew two stitches. Now we're into tanning, right? Hunting a gazelle, slaughtering or flaying or salting or curing its skin, scraping it or cutting it up. Why does writing come after the tanning process? What did people used to write on? Parchment, right? Which was the process of highly curing, right? The skin, right? And what do you need writing for?
Work, business.
Commerce, right? I need writing to be able to write down a deal, right? Give me an example of a deal you gotta get in writing.
Car, house.
Marriage.
A house, right? I'm gonna buy a piece of property. I need a deed, right? That delineates what my property is, right? Name another thing you gotta get.
Marriage is
A marriage, right? Yeah, right? This woman is now my responsibility, not her father's responsibility.
Thinking.
Banking, loans, right? Other kinds of contracts for sale. So, right, that's, when you talk about writing, it's a euphemism for conducting business, right? Building, pulling down, putting out a fire, and lighting a fire. What is a fire for?
Okay.
You can use it for cooking, right? But that's ancillary to what they're thinking about here.
Helping.
All right, yes, smelting or anything having to do with metalwork, right? Whether you're working with copper, gold, silver, iron, in order to work with the metal, what do you need to do?
Lit a fire.
You gotta heat it up, right? Which means you need a fire.
What about staying warm though?
What about
Seems important if it's really cold out.
it? It could be, right?
You can.
But they
put
have a
lots of
fire and
fire
they
Yeah,
make
it
sure
doesn't
it's
say
stored.
no.
It doesn't say you can't tend a fire, it says you can't extinguish one, it says you can't kindle one. Okay,
Why can't you extinguish one?
why do you think?
Be cool.
I mean, say there's a fire and something's burning up and you need to put it out, that doesn't count.
Well, that gets into the Gemara where they say if there's a threat to life, you can break one of these rules to save a life. Okay? But it's about controlling your environment as opposed to standing in relation to your environment. But lighting the fire, right? That's why the next thing is striking with a hammer, right? Because smithing is intimately involved. But we're going to talk a lot about lighting a fire, right? And then, of course, taking things from one domain to another is commerce, right? I'm transporting goods. So, without getting too deep in the weeds, right? Of these 39 categories, Moses says the one thing you got to focus on is lighting a fire. Now, why would Moses be so excited about lighting a fire? Yeah.
maybe creation, use fire to create things.
Yeah, fire is used to create all kinds of things. Right? You think about that tabernacle, they're gonna have to make all this gold work, they gotta make a lampstand, they gotta make the cherubs on top of the ark, they gotta create the silver footings that the posts are gonna go in, they gotta create all those metal clasps and rings and all those different things. It's a lot of work, right? That's gonna come from lighting that fire. and a good thing. However, a fire is also what? Can be very destructive, right? A fire can be used for tremendous good, and a fire can destroy, right? What did God do, right? To keep the people bounded, what does God do? He sets a fire down through the community, right? So a fire can be used for constructive purposes, and a fire can also be destructive as well. Yeah.
I feel like Moses was also saying fire because fire has so many uses outside of building a tabernacle. Cooking, for example, people are gonna cook when they forget to cook before Shabbat. Maybe they're cold. You know, people would think, well, I can light a fire. They might forget.
Right. So when we think about fire, right? We can think about fire on the outside, you know, you build a fire so you can do things, and then we think about, well, what does it mean to build a fire on the inside? Right? What does it mean to be, let's call it fired up? So the Hebrew word for fired up is hit lahavut. A lahav in Hebrew is a flame. So when you have a heat at the beginning of a Hebrew word, it's the reflexive, the thing that you, so lehit la besh means to get oneself dressed. Okay, lehit rachetz means to wash oneself. Okay, when you have a heat at the beginning of a word, you're doing something to yourself. So what is it, heat lahev or heat lahavut, the act of being self-inflamed? Like when you fire yourself up, right? Ask Barack Obama. Fired up, right? Here we go, ready to go, fire. Wasn't that his chant that he had at all the campaign rallies? So Martin Buber spends a lot of time. Did you have something to say?
I was gonna say, you're not supposed to get fired up. You're supposed to have sex on the Sabbath.
That's really fired up. If you do it right, yes. Right?
Yes.
Right? So you're supposed to, right, have ardor, passion, right? And one of the things Martin Buber, who's the great existential thinker of the 20th century, was a big critique of what he saw in Jewish practice as rote oblivion, where the practice of Judaism had been about checking off the list, but there was no passion, there was no feeling, it was just rote. And he was in love with Hasidic, the early Hasidic masters, because they were the ones that were less interested in the letter of the law and much more passionate about the spirit of the law. And so Martin Buber, in his scholarship, actually translates thousands of Hasidic tales because he wanted to bring the wisdom of these Hasidim that were in Eastern Europe to a Western audience to say, I know they look like Schlemiels, right? With their 17th century Polish dress and their long beards, but behind that is immense wisdom that we can use for ourselves today. So in his book, The Legend of the Baal Shem, he talks about how Hit Lahavut, being fired up, kindling that inner fire, was really the project of what the Hasidim were all about. And he writes, this is translated from the German. He writes in the introduction, or the first chapter of his book, The Legend of the Baal Shem, a section on Hit Lahavut, which is sometimes also translated as ecstasy. Hit Lahavut, he says, is the burning, the ardor of ecstasy. A fiery sword guards the way to the tree of life, right? You read the end of the story of the Garden of Eden, there's a fiery sword that guards the entrance so they can't get back there. Did you want to say something?
Yeah, I'm just thinking about the imagery of fire, and when God appears to the people, it is the bush that's burning but doesn't burn up. It's the cloud in the day and the fire by night.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the whole imagery of the fire God is represented in the fire, and therefore, if we have that fire within us, you know, it's all connected, that fire imagery.
Exactly, right? So he says, this fiery sword scatters into sparks before the touch of an impassioned heart, whose light finger is more powerful than it. In other words, you want to get back to the Garden of Eden? You want to get back to a place where there's an intimate setting where you and God can dwell together? Cultivate this sense of fire in your heart. It's not just by checking those things off the list. So he says, Tehit lahavut, the path is open, and all bounds sink before its step. The world is no longer its place. It is the place of the world. He lahavut unlocks the meaning of life. Without it, even heaven has no meaning and no being. Pardon his gendered language, which was the style of his age. I have a feeling Martin Buber would write in a gender-neutral style if he were alive today. But he wasn't, so this is how he wrote. If a man fulfilled the whole of the teaching and all the commandments, right? If someone did all the Torah and the mitzvahs, but has not had the rapture, the burning, when he dies and passes beyond, he gets to the world to come. But because he has not left, he has not felt rapture in the world, he also doesn't feel it in paradise, right? So if you think about it, right, like he's making a pretty strong critique of his Orthodox friends who say, oh, how do I get to the world to come? How do I get to paradise?
Follow the rules.
Just follow the rules. And he says, if you just follow the rules, meh, your experience of eternity is going to be meh, right? If you have to experience that rapture, right? You know, when you have that spiritual experience, whether it's in a ritual or at a service or at the theater or at a music concert, or you read a piece of literature or something and you're done, you're like, woo, right? And you just feel like that was like a rush when you're done, right? It's almost like when it's over, you're just, you have, because it was like you were swept away with it, right? You were inflamed in it. And then it's over and you're like, wow, right? If you've never had that rapturous experience doing a Jewish commandment, you're not going to get it in paradise. That's what you need to feel. You need to feel that flame inside of you. Okay? He continues. He lahavut, whoops, did I go too far? Yeah, I did. He lahavut can appear at all places and at all times. You don't have to come to temple to get Hit lahavut. You don't have to go to Woodstock, right? You don't have to go to a literary festival or wherever it is that you go to experience. It could be anywhere at any time. Each hour is its footstool and each deed its throne. Nothing can stand against it. Nothing hold it down. Nothing can defend itself against its might, which raises everything corporeal to spirit. He who is in it is in holiness. He can speak idle words with his mouth. The teaching of the Lord is in his heart at this hour. He can pray in a whisper, yet his heart cries out in his breast. He can sit in a community of men, yet he walks with God, mixing with the creatures, yet secluded from the world. In other words, I can still do the things that Judaism tells me to do, and I can still whisper the words. And even if it looks like on the outside, I'm just davening, my heart might be woo, right? It doesn't have to be something that you would perceive happening to somebody on the outside. Each thing and each deed is thus sanctified. When a man attaches himself to God, he can allow his mouth to speak what it may speak, and his ear to hear what it may hear, and he will bind the things to their higher roots. Hang on one second, so I just want to share one last piece.
Pretty good.
But not only in faces out of the dark and in the silence of wandering does God give himself to the soul afire with him. Right? You don't have to go on some journey. You don't have to go sit under a lotus tree. Right? Rather, out of all the things of the earth, God's eye looks into the eye of the one who seeks. And everything that exists, every being is the fruit in which God offers himself to the yearning soul. What fascinated Buber with Chassidut was the idea that changing a diaper can be the most holy act ever. Washing the dishes can launch you into the highest stratospheres of spiritual experience. You just have to be what?
Open.
Open to it, right? All the things of the earth can be this way, right? The soul of him who longs very much for a woman and regards her many-colored garment, again, forgive his cisgendered language, right? Is not turned to its gorgeous material and its colors, but to the splendor of the longed-for woman who is clothed in it. But the others see only the garment and no more. So he who in truth longs for and embraces God sees in all the things of the world only the strength and the pride of the Creator who lives in those things. But he who is not on that rung of awareness, those things seem separate from God. And so what he's describing, right, is this idea that a person whose soul is inflamed, right, who's fired up, is somebody that is to be admired. That's what you're aiming for. If you want to have real, authentic spiritual encounter, you're going to go after that. Sounds good, right? So then why is it that the first thing Moses would say on Shabbat is don't kindle a fire? Isn't Shabbat the time when you come to Temple Bethel to kindle your fire? Right? You come to services because you're hoping that something will be touched inside of you or that it will be lit, right? We spend all the week and our candle kind of burns down and then it comes Shabbat, you kind of want to be rekindled. And yet, what's the first thing Moses says?
Opposite.
Don't do that.
The opposite was your day of rest, preparing for your day of rest.
Okay, good. Good, Scott, you were gonna say something.
What I was gonna say was at the beginning of this paragraph, when we listened to Yosef, the hostage, and he would talk about day by day, minute by minute, and second by second, was to find that fire in him to be able to continue to the next moment, to the next day. And I found that particularly moving as to how he was able to, for 2.5 years, keep that fire in him against all of those other odds that he was able to, see that half heart when the boot missed his head.
Yeah.
And that he was able to maintain that fire for 2.5 years. And now to continue that, to come around the world, to share with us what that fire might have felt like.
Yeah. So that fire can also be dangerous. So let's look where the fire became dangerous. This is in last week's Parsha. Someone else want to read this? Let's go ahead.
When the people saw that Moses was so long in coming down from the mountain, the people gathered against Aaron and said to him, "Come, make us a god who shall go before us, for we do not know what has happened to Moses."
All right, keep going.
The man who brought us from the land of Egypt.
All right, so take a look at this word here. It's the same word as the beginning of our Parsha, right? What happened when Moses was delayed in coming down? The people congregated. But they didn't congregate for the kind of constructive purpose that Moses is convoking them in this week's Parsha. They came together for solace, right? They're terrified. And so they revert to what they know, which is a God you can see and touch. Make for us, Kum, get up, right? Make for us a God that will go before us, because that guy Moses, we don't know what happened to him. So Aaron says, go ahead.
Aaron said to them, "Take off the gold rings that are on the ears of your wives, your sons, your daughters, and bring them to me." And all the people took off the gold rings that were in their ears and brought them to Aaron.
Doesn't this sound so much like the beginning of this week's Parsha? They came and they brought exactly what they were asked to bring. And did they have to? No, they're giving this from free will offerings. Same process.
This he took from them and cast in a mold, and made it into a molten calf. And
Now,
they
interesting,
explained,
it's interesting, right?
and
We
they,
don't call it the golden calf. What is the calf called? The molten calf. The calf that is all aflame. And they say to this flaming calf,
this is your God, O Israel, who brought you out of the land of Egypt.
okay, so, and then they become ecstatic, right? What do ecstatically? They go and offer sacrifices and they get up to dance, right? To play, right? They're at, burning calf Woodstock. And then later, how does Moses restore order to the camp? Keep going, Spencer.
As soon as Moses came near the camp and saw the calf and the dancing, he became enraged. And he hurled the tablets from his hands and shattered them at the foot of the mountain. He took the calf that they had made and burned it. He ground it to powder and strewed it upon the water, so made the Israelites drink it.
Interestingly, right? How does Moses restore order? Fire.
Gets passion.
Not only does he get passionate himself, right? What does he do to their calf? He takes the burning calf and burns it, right? Vayikach et ha'egel asher asu, right? He took the calf that they had made, v'yisaref ba'esh, and he burned it in fire. V'yitchan ad asher dak, and he ground it to powder. He put it in their drinking water and made them drink it.
What's the significance
Right?
of that?
Say it again.
What's the significance of that? He made them drink it.
It's good for the intestines.
It disappeared, right?
Aren't they ingesting then that negative behavior of creating a calf?
He wants them to taste it, right? It's denigrating. I don't want to get too far into the weeds on that, right? Just because we're a little short on time. So now Moses confronts Aaron about this. Spencer, keep going.
Moses said to Aaron, "What did this people do to you that you have brought such great sin upon them?" Aaron said, Let not my Lord be enraged. You know that this people is bent on evil. They said to me, that's really bad, make us a God to lead us, for we do not know what has happened to Moses, the man who brought us from the land of Egypt. So I said to them, whoever has gold, take it off. They gave it to me, and I hurled it into the fire, and out came this calf.
Right? I just threw it in the fire, and out came right?
I don't know.
But interestingly, right? What does Aaron think of fire?
Trying to peace, these feet.
In Aaron's mind, fire is something that cannot be controlled. Fire has its own will. So if the people are inflamed, you know this people, I can't control them. And the fire has its own will. I just took the gold, it wasn't me. I just took the gold and I put it in the fire. And the fire created the calf. And what is Moses trying to say to the Israelites before they embark on this project? I want you to be fired up, and I want you to exercise control over that fire. Because fire is not something that has a mind of its own. Fire is something for you to manage, right? Rashi says, God prefaced the instructions about the Mishkan work with the warning about Shabbat to tell them that the Mishkan doesn't supersede Shabbat. Because you think about it, right? On the seventh day, Sephorno says, you shall do no work, even the work of the Mishkan. You would think, oh my gosh, God says, do the Mishkan. I should do the work of the Mishkan. I'm doing holy work. Shabbat is holy, the Mishkan is holy. Therefore, the work of the Mishkan, Davka should be done on Shabbat.
Control it, don't do it.
Right? And Moses is saying there's a higher order of greater value than fire. Martin Buber says, I can't think of anything more valuable than fire. I can't think of anything more valuable. It is the pathway to holiness. And at the same time, it can also be the pathway to the greatest sin imaginable. If you don't have some way of stepping back from the fire or not using fire, because that in of itself is something that matters too. We'll take 2 more comments, then I really want to get to some good stuff.
So on Shabbat, if you have that little flame and you bring it up, you're not starting a new fire. You're just intensifying what's inside of you and making it more holy. If there's no flame in you.
I like that. I like that. Good, good. Yes, Spence?
I've always thought team building activities were great for building community. Like, hey, build a tent of meeting, okay?
And I think that's what they're trying to do, right? This is the first national project of the Jewish people, right? They used to be sort of doing their own thing in their own tent all the time, right?
The second one was the first one, the Golden Cat.
But, well,
Right.
yes, but that was more spontaneous. This is more deliberate. Okay? I'm gonna skip over this piece, which says the way we know that there's 39 categories of work is in the beginning. I want you to just take a look at this, right? At the end of Parsha Kitisa, at the end of Parsha Tetzaveh, it says, right? And God said to Moses, speak to the Israelite people and say, nevertheless, right? Don't forget, this is like an afterthought almost. Keep my Sabbaths, for this is the sign between me and you throughout the ages, that you may know that I, Adonai, your God, have consecrated you. The fact is that is the keeping of the Sabbath, this restraining oneself, forbearance, is more of a pathway to finding a sense of holiness than simply being out of control, inflamed. Rashi says, even though you are compelled by enthusiasm for the work, let Shabbat not be superseded by it. Seforno says, even though kindling fire is on the whole destructive, nevertheless, since it makes all or most of the forms of work possible, it is forbidden on Shabbat, because even though it's for good, you have to keep away from it. Aviza Zornberg, who writes this absolutely gorgeous reflection on the book of Exodus. She's written one on each of the books. She's an incredible scholar. This one's called The Particulars of Rapture. And her comment on this week's Parsha says, Moses is entirely implicated in this inflamed state, even more than the people. He is the one who carries the many words of God that frame the imperative of work. Rashi's comment powerfully shifts the focus away from the objective area, right, where he says, stop the creative work of the 6-day week, to the subjective area. Keep my Shabbats. Don't allow your obsession with creative work to displace an alternate sensibility. Evidently, the Mishkan work holds such an obsessive power that emphatic limits have to be placed on it. The Israelites can't control themselves. They bring more than they need to. And so the pathway to spirituality is not simply by getting fired up, because getting fired up can also lead one down a very destructive path. Indeed, she says, we may say that in a metaphoric sense, fire appears in the people's avid enthusiasm when Moses appeals to them for donations to the Mishkan. This is the fire in the heart, which is the subject of Moses's first address. Take from among you gifts to God, anyone whose heart is so moved. And then she says, I'm going to skip to one more piece. Shabbat, she says, is a time for reverie. There's actually a part that I didn't include where she says, Shabbat's a time, you can't do this on Shabbat, you're not supposed to write. It's a time for doodling, right? People who are involved in creative work, when you see someone doodling, it looks like nothingness, right? On the other hand, doodling is sometimes the precursor that you need to engage in the creative process. She says, Shabbat is a time for the soul to do some doodling, not creative work. More accurately, its effect is not simply counteractive, but prophylactic. Before the fire takes hold, the Shabbat reverie conditions the fever of the work. It is perhaps for this reason that after the golden calf experience, Moses changes the order of God's commands and prefaces the Mishkan instructions with the Shabbat caveat. In some pristine universe, Shabbat may serve as a palliative to the productive frenzy of the 6 days. But in the world of more complex knowledge that follows the golden calf, Shabbat must come first. For now, lying fallow, not doing, allowing hints and suggestions to be caught in the spider's web of the mind becomes the very condition of creativity, which, in Henry James's words, takes to itself the faintest hints of life and converts the pulses of the air into revelations.
Almost like meditation.
In essence, what Moses is saying is if you really want to do good creative work, sometimes the best thing you can do is to stop being so inflamed. Because it's that time that you spend apart from that energy that can often give you the perspective on how you want to apply it and how you want to manage it. Otherwise, that energy is much like Aaron suggests. That's an energy that controls you, that ends up having a mind of its own, and that can lead not towards the constructive purposes like building a sanctuary for God on the outside and on the inside, but it's a way that can lead us away from God's presence altogether. Last thoughts, questions? Yeah.
I have a quote I found by Rabbi Sachs that I saw the other day and I thought it was so good.
Mm-hmm.
He said the greatness of the tabernacle was that it was a collective achievement, one in which not everyone did the same thing, each gave a different thing, each contribution was valued, and therefore each participant felt valued.
Mm-hmm. Beautiful.
That was good.
Beautiful. So I hope everybody has a fired up Shabbat, and one in which you can step away to gain some perspective on how to best use your inner fire.
Thank you.
Shabbat shalom.
Rabbi?
Thank you.
I have a question.
Yes.
Why only,
One second.
why only gazelles? Was that the only animal that takes a hunt, or?
I'd have to get into the Gemara, why gazelle and whatever. It was a standard animal. Interestingly, they don't talk about a cow and they don't talk about other more domesticated animals like a sheep. They use
Something else.
I'm not really, I have to take a look at it.
Where did they get
Dolphin skin is not dolphin like flipper. Dolphin was a fish that had a very thick kind of rubbery skin that they often use for sails. That's the part that's wrong. The whole parting of the Red Sea, the manna, the water from the rock, that you're full with, but where did you get the water? Biblical scholars, 1 second, Mark. Biblical scholars talk about how these things were, secrets. They were just ubiquitous. They were just, people were used to, they knew what all that was. Yes, ma'am. Shabbat shalom, everybody online.